Hello again, listeners. Tonight's story follows Bren, a silent human wanderer who buys freedom for Val, a chained orc woman hiding a royal truth. What begins with ash, rain, and one burned paper becomes a dangerous road toward trust, loyalty, and a crown she never asked to reclaim.
Bren reached the lower market just as the rain stopped pretending to be weather and became a fine grey dust settling over awnings, carts, shoulders, reins, boot leather, the blank faces of men who had come to buy flour and salt and found themselves standing near a platform because misery, like blood on fresh snow, drew the eye even when the mind wished to turn away. He had meant only to cross the town and keep north before evening, because the road outside the border wall climbed into black firs and old stone, and he had been moving toward black firs and old stone for 6 months, without ever admitting that a direction had become a habit in the absence of a destination. His horse waited in the stable behind the willow tap, with one saddlebag half empty and the other holding a whetstone, a spare shirt, a roll of bandage, a packet of tea gone stale from disuse, and a strip of blue ribbon folded into oilcloth, so many times the creases had become permanent. He carried the rest on his body, a knife under his coat, a short sword plain enough not to invite comment, scars that pulled when the air turned wet, and the kind of silence people mistook for patience until they saw the old measurements moving behind his eyes. The lower market smelled of tallow, wet wool, horse dung, and river mud. A fishmonger was covering his table with canvas. 2 children chased each other between crates until their mother caught one by the back of his collar and cuffed him without malice. A drunk slept under a stair with rain in his beard. Bren noticed all of it because the body of a soldier noticed before a man decided whether noticing mattered. And then he noticed the platform, the rope rails, the auctioneer in a brown hat polished dark at the brim by greasy fingers, and the line of people standing behind him with iron on their wrists. He slowed only because the crowd narrowed the street. That was what he told himself. Then he saw the orc woman. She stood third from the end, taller than the men beside her, even with her spine held carefully straight instead of proud, as if pride had become too heavy a garment, and she had set it aside for practical reasons. Her skin should have been green in the way mountain pines were green after rain, dense and alive and difficult to darken. But it had gone ashen at the hollows, grey under the cheekbones, yellow where bruising had faded badly along one side of her jaw. Her wrists looked wrong. That was what stopped him. Orc women he had seen in war had carried wrists like axe handles, tendons thick beneath the skin, hands made for bow, blade, hammer, child, crown, whatever the day had required. Hers were too narrow inside the shackles, the iron loose enough to turn if she moved, though she did not move. Her hair had been cut unevenly at the nape, black and coarse, and growing out in ragged lengths around ears that caught the light in small, hard edges. A scar, old and pale against green, ran from the bridge of her nose toward the left cheek, but did not mar her face so much as declare that something had once tried to change it and failed. She was perhaps 25, perhaps younger, perhaps older in the way captivity stole the arithmetic from a body. Her eyes were fixed above the crowd, not on the roofline, not on the sky, not on any living person. Bren had seen eyes like that in a trench outside Merrowford, when boys waited for morning under shell fire and had gone somewhere in themselves no officer could reach. He had worn that look once, though without chains. He knew the particular labour of standing in a place and refusing to be fully present, because presence would break something that needed to remain whole until later. The auctioneer was speaking. Bren did not hear the first words. He heard laughter from a man with a butcher's apron. He heard coins slide in a purse. He heard a woman at the back mutter that the orc was half dead and no good for field work unless a buyer fancied burying his purchase before winter. The orc woman did not blink. Rain collected at the points of her tusks, small and ivory, one chipped near the tip. Bren stepped to the edge of the crowd. He had not bought a person in his life, had never thought of coin as a thing that could pass through his hand and alter another body's ownership, and the thought made something cold go through him. Not shock exactly, because war cured a man of the luxury of surprise, but disgust, clean and immediate as the taste of iron. He should have kept walking. The road north waited. The inn waited. His horse waited. No order had been given. No man had called for aid. No oath bound him. The auctioneer lifted the woman's chin with the end of a cane, showing the line of her throat to the crowd, as if he were turning a horse's head for inspection. Bren's right hand moved before the rest of him had decided. It closed around the cane. The auctioneer looked down, annoyed first and then careful when he saw Bren's face. Bren had learned long ago that anger wasted force. He did not raise his voice. "Price," he said. The crowd shifted. Someone laughed because they thought it might become interesting. The auctioneer tried to recover his rhythm, spreading one hand wide, naming a number too high for what he believed he was selling and too low for what any soul was worth. Bren paid it without bargaining, which was a mistake in markets and a mercy in battle. The auctioneer's mouth tightened around the loss of theatre. A clerk counted coin. A key changed hands. Bren took it and stepped onto the platform. The Orc woman's gaze did not drop to him until he was close enough that she could have broken his nose with her forehead if she had chosen and had the strength. Her eyes were gold, not bright but banked, like fire under ash. He saw calculation in them, and exhaustion, and behind both a shape of command so deeply buried that he almost missed it because no throne, banner, or polished mail stood near enough to name it. He unlocked the shackles. The iron opened with a small, ugly click. She did not rub her wrists. She did not thank him. She looked at his hands, then at the key, then at the distance between his boots and hers. "Can you walk?" he asked. She considered him for the length of one breath. "Yes." Her voice was low and rough from disuse, the word shaped carefully as if she were spending something scarce. Bren nodded once and stepped off the platform, leaving room for her to come down without touching him. That was the first stone, though neither of them knew it then. She followed. The crowd lost interest when nothing dramatic happened. Men wanted spectacle from mercy as much as from cruelty, and Bren offered them neither. He walked through the market with the woman 3 paces behind him, not because he had told her to walk there, but because that was the distance she chose, and he did not shorten it. At the Willow Tap, the innkeeper's wife came out from behind the counter with a broom in her hand and stopped when she saw them. Her eyes moved over Bren, the Orc woman, the unlocked shackles still hanging from Bren's fist. Her mouth pressed thin, not from pity, but from the quick moral arithmetic of a person who owned rooms in a town where law arrived late and left early. "One more room," Bren said. "If you have one. Only the loft." She said. "Roof leaks." "Mine doesn't." "No," she said, and looked at Vial without knowing the name. "Yours doesn't." Bren set coins on the counter. The innkeeper's wife took them, and then, after a hesitation so small most men would have missed it, set a second key beside his change. "Kitchen closes at dusk." "Food now," Bren said. "Whatever is soft." The woman with the broom looked at him again, and understood more than he had meant to say. She called toward the back. Bren led the Orc woman up the stairs, slowly because he heard the slight drag in her left step, and because pride could turn stairs into enemies if a man made a performance of helping. The room was narrow, bed against one wall, small table under the window, basin, pitcher, chest with a broken latch, pegs for coats, a hearth no wider than a shield. Bren set the key on the table and the shackles beside it, then changed his mind and carried the iron to the hearth, where he placed it in the ashes as if burying something too cheaply made to deserve earth. The Orc woman stood just inside the doorway. Her eyes counted the exits, the distance to the knife at his belt, the weight of the chair, the window latch, the angle of the roof outside. He watched her do it and felt, unexpectedly, the quiet pleasure he had once felt watching a competent scout read a field. She was not frozen. She was measuring. Good, he thought, and did not smile because a smile might have asked something of her. He pointed to the bed, then to the floor near the hearth. Either, he said. Door locks from inside. Key stays there. She did not look at the bed. Where will you sleep? Chair. Why? The question was not curiosity. It was a probe pressed into a seam. Bren removed his sword belt and set it on the table, far enough from the bed, close enough to his own hand if the door opened. Because there is one bed. Her gaze sharpened, not softened. Men say generous things when they want witnesses inside themselves. Bren had heard many accusations in his life, but few so precise. He took off his wet coat and hung it on a peg. Water ran from the hem to the floor. I don't need you to witness me. She absorbed this without approving it. There was no trust in her face, only a small adjustment of threat. Food came on a tray. Barley porridge with cream, broth with torn bread, stewed apples, a cup of water, another of weak beer. Bren took the tray at the door before the serving girl could step inside. He placed it on the table and moved back. The orc woman looked at the food as if it were a weapon whose mechanism she did not yet understand. Bren sat in the chair near the hearth and began unbuckling his boots. He did not tell her to eat. Commands attached themselves to food too easily in places like the one she had left. After a time, she crossed the room and took the water first. She lifted it, smelled it, touched a finger to the surface, tasted that, waited. Bren kept his eyes on his bootlaces. The patience was not performed because he was not patient by nature. He simply knew there were moments when action was a hand laid on a bruise. She drank half the cup in 3 swallows, then stopped with a force that made the muscles in her throat jump. She ate the apples, slowly, then the broth, then a few spoonfuls of porridge before her body refused what hunger demanded. When she set the spoon down, shame moved across her face like a shadow from a passing cloud. Bren stood, took nothing from the tray, and went to the basin. More later, he said. She looked at him as if the words had reached for her and she had stepped back from them. There may not be later. He poured water into the basin and washed his hands though they were not dirty. There usually is. The room held that for a while. Night came down over the town with cartwheels and closing shutters, the muffled bark of a dog, the sour singing of men leaving the tavern below. Bren built the fire low. The orc woman sat on the bed only after he had settled in the chair with his boots off and his knife placed on the floor beside him in plain sight, handle turned away from her. She did not lie down. She remained seated with her back against the wall, knees drawn up, hands loose, but ready. He closed his eyes because watching a person try to sleep could become another chain. He did not sleep for a long time. Neither did she. Once, near midnight, he heard her move. Not toward him. Toward the table. A soft scrape. The key lifted, set down. The sword belt touched, shifted less than a finger's width. His purse, left deliberately near the tray, opened and closed without coin removed. A test, then another, then another. Small stones tapped before weight was placed on them. Bren kept his breathing even. At some hour when rain returned softly to the roof, she lay down on top of the blanket rather than under it. Much later he opened his eyes and saw that the water cup stood empty near her hand. Without thinking, he rose silently, refilled it from the pitcher, and set it where she could reach without waking. The movement struck him halfway through, the old domestic shape of it, the exact angle of a cup placed near a sleeping hand, and for one raw second the room became another room with a cracked blue wall and fever heat trapped under shutters. A woman's hair dark on a pillow, his own younger hand trying to be useful against a thing no blade could meet. He almost spoke a name. The sound rose and died behind his teeth. The orc woman's eyes opened in the dark. Of course they did. Bren stepped back. Water. he said, and sat down again. She watched him until dawn. Quick note before we continue. If you want hotter and uncensored orc-bound fantasy romance stories, I'll be sharing them on my Patreon page. These are the deeper and more intense scenes I can't post here, so check the description for details. The next morning she ate before he woke fully, which told him she had decided the food would not be taken away for eating it without permission. And when he opened his eyes, he found half the porridge gone, the bread gone, the apples untouched and wrapped in a cloth she had torn from the edge of a napkin. Saving sweetness for later, he thought, or saving evidence. He did not ask. The town outside smelled washed and mean. Bren bought her clothes from a seamstress, who did not ask why an orc woman needed a wool dress, leggings, a heavy cloak, and boots cut down from a man's pair, though her needle hand trembled when measuring Viel's shoulders. The dress was plain brown, too loose at first, belted with rope until leather could be found, and the cloak had a patched hood that shadowed her face without hiding the tusks entirely. Viel stood through the fitting with the discipline of a carved post, eyes on the seamstress, hands still at her sides, enduring touch only after Bren stepped into the hall and closed the door. When she came out, the change struck him harder than he expected. Not because she looked healed. She did not. The clothes hung from her in places where strength had been eaten down, but the absence of chains gave her outline back to her, and something beneath the ruin aligned itself. The seamstress saw it too. She dropped her gaze. Viel noticed that. Bren noticed Viel noticing. In the stable, he saddled the horse while she stood near the door, not close to the animal and not far from escape. "You can ride," he said. "I can walk." That wasn't the question. She studied the horse, then Bren. "Can you?" It took him a moment to understand she meant whether he could continue on foot beside her if she rode. A different man might have laughed. Bren tightened the girth. "Yes. Then I can ride." Her answer held no gratitude, but something in it accepted the arrangement as practical rather than humiliating. He helped by not helping. She mounted from the block, breath stopping only once when her left foot took weight. He saw the tremor and looked away. They left by the north gate under a sky the color of old pewter. The guards looked at Viel, then at Bren's sword, then at the stamped paper the auction clerk had given him to prove purchase, and Bren felt a heatless anger move through him at the idea that freedom might require a receipt. At the first bend beyond the wall, he took the paper from his coat, held it to the small flame of his tinderbox, and let it blacken between two stones. Viel watched from the saddle. The paper curled, names and seals shrinking into smoke. "That was worth coin," she said. "No, it was proof." "Of what?" She looked at him then, really looked, the way one blade might test another for temper. "That you owned what you paid for." Bren ground the ash under his heel. "I paid for the key." The road climbed. For 2 days they spoke only when weather, food, or danger required it. Bren was used to silence, but hers had edges. It was not the broad, empty quiet of a field after snow. It was a room with someone awake inside it, listening. She watched how he bought meal at a roadside farm, how he placed coins on the gatepost and stepped back before the farmer's daughter came near, how he kept his hands visible when speaking to frightened people, how he slept with his back to a tree and one ear turned to the road, how he never moved between her and an open path unless there was a cliff or cart or horse to avoid. She learned the pattern of his limp, slight and old, appearing on downward slopes. He learned that she did not like anyone behind her left shoulder. He learned that she counted their supplies each evening after he did, and that her count was faster. He learned that when crows lifted from trees ahead, she watched not the birds, but the shadows beneath them. On the 3rd day he left his small knife beside the fire while he went to the stream. When he returned, it lay precisely where he had left it, but a notch in the damp ground showed she had picked it up, tested its balance, and set it down with the handle turned the same way. He felt again that quiet pleasure, respect like a coal warming under ash. "Good knife," she said that night. First words in nearly a day. Plain. Plain things tell fewer lies. Bren stirred the pot of beans and wild onion. Usually. You don't ask my name. You didn't give it. She sat opposite the fire, cloak around her shoulders, the orange light catching in her eyes and turning them briefly molten. Others would have asked. Others ask many things. And you? He took the pot off the stones and let it cool. I ask when I need the answer. That should have ended it. She let it almost end. Then she said, Vial. The name crossed the fire between them and did not vanish. Bren repeated it once in his mind, not aloud, because a name given freely ought not be handled too quickly. He nodded. Bren. I know. Of course she did. The innkeeper's wife had said it when handing him the key. The seamstress, too. Perhaps the guards. Vial had collected his name and kept it until she had something to place beside it. He filled her bowl first because she was still too thin, and because he had learned that if he filled his own first, she waited, reading hierarchy into hunger. Then he filled his. She ate more than before. In the morning she asked for the knife. For what? He asked. Cutting snares. There were no snares in sight. He gave it to her handle first. By noon she had found 3 rabbit snares along the edge of an abandoned logging path, 2 old and empty, one holding a hare recently dead. She freed it, reset the snare better than it had been set before, and handed him the knife back without comment. That night they ate meat. She took the bones and cracked them with a stone for marrow, then paused with the stone in her hand as if expecting rebuke for a table manner learned somewhere far from tables. Bren passed her the second bone. Show me, he said. She stared at him. The request had slipped out before caution could file it down. He expected silence. Instead she set the bone on a flat rock and struck it once, clean, controlled, no wasted motion. Not like chopping wood, she said, like opening a hinge. He tried. The bone skidded. She made a small sound that might, in a better-fed woman, have become amusement. He looked up. Her face had already closed, but not entirely. A line remained at one corner of her mouth, proof of something living under watchfulness. He felt it land in him with a force out of proportion to its size. Trust as architecture, though neither of them named it. A knife returned, a bowl filled without ceremony, a correction offered, a near laugh allowed to survive for half a breath. The road narrowed after the 5th day, leaving farms behind for upland scrub and granite teeth pushing through the soil. Bren had planned no route beyond north, but old training disliked vagueness, and each evening he unfolded his map, more out of discipline than intention. Vial studied it from across the fire without asking to touch. On the 6th evening, he turned it so the letters faced her. Road splits here, he said. West goes to Stonebreak, north follows the old Imperial Road. Her hand, which had been reaching for her cup, stopped short of the clay. Imperial, she said. Orc Road. Was. Humans name everything as if the naming ended it. He looked at the map again. The stones are still there. Stones remember better than men. It was the longest thing she had said since the room at the inn. Bren did not crowd it. North, then, he said. Her eyes lifted. Why? You looked at the road before you looked away. For a moment she seemed to resent him for seeing it. Then she looked toward the dark line of hills. That is not a reason. It's more than I had yesterday. She turned the cup in both hands. Her fingers were thickening again by small degrees, swelling with food and rest, or perhaps returning to themselves. And if I said west? We'd go west. Because you paid for the key? The old test, different shape. Bren folded the map along a crease soft from years. Because you are riding the horse. She watched him long enough for the fire to shift and settle. North, she said. The old Imperial Road had been built for armies, trade wagons, and the arrogance of rulers who expected mountains to yield because stone had been laid over them. In places it remained wide enough for 4 carts abreast, paved with black slabs that held warmth after sunset and rainwater in shallow seams. In other places roots had lifted it, frost had split it, and young birches grew from cracks where banners might once have passed. Vial changed when they reached it. Not openly. Her silence deepened, but the quality altered, grief and attention braided together. She dismounted more often despite weakness, walking with one hand brushing the stones when the road climbed. Once Bren saw her stop beside a marker half sunk in moss. The inscription was in the Orc script, angular and severe, cut deep enough to outlast weather. She touched 2 fingers to the first line, then to her brow. He looked away because some rituals were doors and he had not been invited through. That evening she repaired his boot. He had been cutting a strip of leather from an old strap, awkwardly because the sole had opened near the toe and wet had begun to come through. Vial watched for perhaps 3 minutes before irritation overcame distance. "Give it here." He gave it. She took the boot, the leather, and the awl from his kit, then frowned at the thread. Too thin. It holds. It lies. She reached into her cloak and removed a cord she had twisted from spare flax fibers over the last 2 days while pretending to do nothing. Bren had noticed the movement of her hands, but not the result. She waxed it with a scrap from their candle and began stitching with strong, ugly precision. Her hands were still too lean, knuckles prominent, nails cracked, but the motion had authority. He watched the work, not her face. "You were taught well," he said. They all paused. "Many things." "Boots included?" "Armor straps, saddle girths, field repairs. A ruler should know which small failures kill men." The sentence came out before she could weigh it down. Bren felt it between them. A ruler, not a chief's daughter, not a captain, not a noblewoman's attendant. A ruler, spoken not as boast, but as training. Vial resumed stitching with slightly more force. He did not ask. The fire popped. Rain threatened but did not fall. After a while he said, "Our quartermaster used to say armies die from rot before blades." Her hand slowed again, but this time not from regret. He was correct. She. The word left him quietly. He had not meant to offer that door either. Vial tied off the cord. She was correct. Bren took the boot when she handed it back. Their fingers did not touch. The space where they might have touched seemed more charged than contact. "Thank you," he said. Vial looked at the fire. It was a bad stitch. "It will hold. Now." That night he dreamed of mud, as he often did, but not the worst mud, not the trenches or fields where horses screamed. He dreamed of the road outside, a town made unsafe by soldiers who had never entered it, refugees moving under a white noon, a woman walking beside him with a scarf over her hair, and a cough she hid until hiding cost more breath than it saved. He woke before dawn with his hand closed around the blue ribbon in his coat pocket. Across the ashes, Vial sat awake, knees up, knife across her thighs. She had let the fire die low to preserve fuel. She did not ask what he had dreamed. He did not ask why she never slept past first light. They sat in the grey before morning, 2 people guarding the same silence from different sides. The weather turned colder as they climbed. Frost silvered the road edges in the mornings. Bren bought a second blanket from a shepherd who overcharged him, and then slipped a packet of dried mint into Vial's hand when he thought Bren was not looking. Vial stared at the mint for a long time afterward. He was afraid, she said. Yes, but not cruel. No. Fear becomes cruelty easily. So does hunger. She looked at him sharply, perhaps because she heard no defense of the shepherd, no defense of men, no bright claim that kindness proved anything broad enough to trust. Only a distinction, narrow and therefore possibly useful. She kept the mint. That night she brewed it with water and a sliver of apple saved from the inn days before, dried now and browned at the edges. She poured half into Bren's cup without ceremony. He took it. The scent rose, green and clean. For one moment he was back in spring fields behind a field hospital where someone had grown mint in broken buckets because sickness smelled less final if something living cut through it. A hand, not vials, had once pressed a hot cup into his own and told him to drink before he fell over. He had forgotten the exact sound of that voice on ordinary words and remembered it all at once with such violence that he had to set the cup down carefully. Vial saw. Her face did not change. "Bitter?" she asked. "No." He lifted the cup again. "Good." She let the lie pass because the tea was not what had hurt him, and because, perhaps, she was learning not to touch every bruise she could see. On the 23rd day, they reached a wayhouse burned sometime in the last month. Its stone walls stood, roof gone, beams black against the pale sky. Bren checked the ashes. Vial walked the perimeter. "Not bandits," she said. "No, professionals." "Yes." She crouched near the doorway and touched a dark stain on the stone. "Not blood. Pitch." They asked questions here. Bren did not ask how she knew. The pattern of damage told enough. One chair broken, not for firewood but under force. Cellar searched, stable doors opened and left open. No bodies, which meant either no one had died or those who had died had been carried away to hide the asking. Vial stood, and for the first time since the auction, Bren saw fear reach her face before discipline closed over it. Not fear of pain, not even fear of death, fear of being found by a story that had been following her longer than he had. "We leave the road," he said. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because professionals use roads faster than we do. You don't know who they seek." "No. You change course anyway." Bren adjusted the strap of his pack. "I know who went still." That struck something. He saw it land and saw her resist its weight. "You have no debt to me," she said. "I know. You have no knowledge. Some. Not enough. Rarely is." For a moment she looked as if she might speak and tear open the silence completely. Instead she turned towards the trees. "There is an old courier path east of here, if the stones remain. You know this country. I know maps." It was true and not true. He let it stand. They left the Imperial Road under a sky crowded with low clouds. The courier path was narrow, half lost under bramble, rising along a ridge where wind combed the pines until they leaned all one way. Travel became slower. Bren led the horse more often than riding could justify. Vial moved carefully but with increasing certainty, as if the land itself supplied missing strength. Once near dusk she found a spring hidden under flat stones carved with Orc letters. She knelt and cleared moss from the inscription with her sleeve. Her shoulders shook once, only once. Bren busied himself with the horse. The water tasted of iron and snow. They camped in a hollow below the spring. That night, Vial spoke into the dark after the fire had burned low. "There was a girl in the fortress kitchens," she said. Bren, who had been sharpening his knife because the motion soothed the hand when the mind would not settle, stopped moving the whetstone. "She stole honey." Vial's voice was flat, but the flatness had effort in it. "Not much. Enough to think no one noticed. Everyone noticed. No one spoke because she gave half to the old hounds and half to the children who carried coal. I was 12. I told the steward to stop counting the honey jars before he taught her to steal better." Bren waited. "That was the first order I gave that mattered." The whetstone rested in his palm. "Did he? Stop counting?" "Yes." A pause. The hounds grew fat. He saw then a place he had never seen. A fortress kitchen, a 12-year-old Orc girl already learning that law without mercy became stupidity, old hounds sleeping near ovens, honey disappearing spoon by spoon. He wanted to ask why she had given him that memory. He knew better. Gifts examined too quickly turned back into guarded objects. "Good order," he said. Vial leaned against a stone, eyes on the coals. "Small one? Small orders feed dogs." She looked at him, and this time the almost smile came easier, though still briefly, as if her face mistrusted the shape. "And children," she said. The agents found them 3 days later in a village called Pell's Crossing, which was generous because there was no crossing anymore, only the remains of a bridge taken by spring floods and a ferry operated by a woman with arms like mill beams. Bren had hoped to buy passage before noon. The ferrywoman eyed Vial, spat tobacco juice into the mud, and named a price high enough to insult a prince. Vial lowered her hood. The ferrywoman's eyes widened, not in recognition of a person, but of a kind. And then, unexpectedly, she cut the price in half. "For my grandmother," she said, and would explain nothing else. They were waiting beside the landing while the ferry came back from the far bank, when the two men entered the village from the south. Bren saw them before they saw him, because he had spent too much of his life watching roads while pretending not to. They wore travel-stained coats of dark wool, boots made for distance, gloves thin enough for weapon work, no visible insignia. One was grey-haired, narrow, clean-shaven, with a face that had never needed to be expressive to be obeyed. The other was younger, broad through the chest, brown beard clipped close, eyes moving once across every roofline, window, hand, dog, cart, then returning to Vial with professional finality. Not bandits, not bounty rabble, men who asked the right questions in the wrong tone. Vial felt Bren's attention shift. She turned her head slightly. The moment she saw them, the life in her body withdrew behind stone. She did not step back. She did not reach for the knife. She went still in a way Bren had seen once in an officer awaiting a verdict already decided elsewhere. The grey-haired man approached with his empty hands visible. That was when Bren knew he was most dangerous. "Roads poor for travellers," the man said. His accent was northern human, not orc, but trained smooth. "Bridges out," Bren said. "So we noticed." The man's gaze rested on Vial. "Your companion has had a difficult journey." Vial said nothing. The younger man's hand hung near his coat seam. Bren placed himself not before Vial, but half a step beside and ahead, enough that any line toward her crossed his reach. "Many have." The grey-haired man smiled politely. "We are looking for someone. Most men are. An orc woman, mid-20s, scar along the face, answers to several names." He let the words settle. "One of them is Vial." The ferry chain clanked across the river. Somewhere behind them a goat bleated. Bren felt Vial's stillness sharpen when her name touched air in that man's mouth. Not the name she had given Bren by a campfire, but something older, wearing the same sound. The grey-haired man watched Bren understand enough to be useful and not enough to be safe. "She is wanted for crimes in the Northern Territories." He continued. "Sedition, murder, theft of imperial property. Several human jurisdictions have agreed to quiet cooperation. There is a reward for returning her unharmed." Vial's face did not change. Bren saw the pulse at the base of her throat beat once, hard. He thought of the burned way house. Questions asked there. He thought of the auction platform. Sold deliberately? Hidden in plain degradation? He did not yet know, but the shape of it moved under the surface. "What's the property?" Bren asked. The man blinked. "Pardon?" "You said theft of imperial property. What property?" A small error entered the polite face, then vanished. "That does not concern you. You came to a ferry landing to concern me." The younger man shifted. Bren let his own right hand hang loose. Vial spoke then, one word. "Bren." Not warning, not plea. A recognition of the cost forming. He did not look at her, because looking would ask a question in front of men who would use the answer. The grey-haired man lowered his voice. "You bought her in a market, yes? We know the route. We know the clerk. Whatever attachment you imagine has formed, I assure you it is based on incomplete information. Step aside, accept payment, and forget the matter. You will have enough coin to go wherever you intended before this complication. Bren thought of North as habit, of rooms he no longer entered, of a cup placed beside a sleeping hand, of a woman on a fever bed, and all the decisions he had made too late or not at all. He thought of Vile resetting a snare better than she found it, of honey stolen for hounds, of a knife returned handle first, of her shoulders shaking once at a spring marked by letters older than the men before him. Attachment, the man had said, as if it were a fever. Incomplete information, as if men ever made moral choices with complete maps. No, Bren said. The younger agent moved. He was fast. Bren had expected fast. The knife came from the man's sleeve toward Bren's ribs. Not Vile, because professionals removed obstacles first. Bren stepped inside the line, caught the wrist, struck the elbow, and drove his shoulder into the man's chest hard enough to empty his breath. The knife fell. Vile moved at the same time, not away but forward, cloak flaring, Bren's small knife in her hand. She did not attack the grey-haired man. She cut the ferry rope. The ferry, halfway to the landing, lurched as the current took its slack. The ferrywoman shouted a curse broad enough for 3 counties. People scattered. The grey-haired man reached under his coat. Bren kicked the fallen knife toward the river and drew his short sword in the same motion. The blade came out plain and unornamented, a working thing. The grey-haired man froze, not from fear but calculation. Vile stood beside Bren now, not behind. Her knife was small, her body still underfed, her left side weak, but command had risen in her so suddenly and completely that even the mud seemed to remember it. The grey-haired man's eyes flicked to her, and for the first time his politeness cracked into hatred. "Your Highness," he said very softly. The words struck the village quieter than a shout would have. Bren heard them. He did not turn. Vile did not answer. The ferrywoman, perhaps not understanding and perhaps understanding too much, hauled on the emergency chain from the far bank and sent the ferry sideways. The crowd began to murmur. A title could do dangerous things in poor villages. It could draw hope, greed, fear, old loyalties, old debts. The grey-haired man knew it. So did Vile. So did Bren, though he had only just received the missing piece and found, with a strange calm, that it changed less than it should. The broad agent staggered up, one arm hanging wrong but not broken. Bren could have pressed. He did not. Fighting in crowds killed people who had not chosen sides. The grey-haired man stepped back first. "This is not mercy," he said to Bren. "You have no idea what you are protecting." Bren kept the sword level. "I know who asked me not to touch the door key." The statement meant nothing to the agent. It meant enough to Vile that her breath caught once beside him. The agents withdrew because professionals survived by knowing when a village had become too full of variables. They did not run. They walked south with the promise of return in their spines. Bren sheathed his sword only when they passed the last house. The ferrywoman spat again, this time with more emphasis. "Fare doubled," she said. Vile looked at her. "You cut the rope," the woman added. "I cut it well," Vile said. The ferrywoman stared, then laughed despite herself. "That you did." They crossed the river after repairs that took an hour and cost Bren nearly all his remaining coin. On the far bank, no road waited, only a deer track climbing into dark spruce. They walked until the village smoke disappeared behind the ridge. Vile did not speak. Bren did not ask. The new knowledge walked with them like a third traveller. Your Highness, the old empire, the missing heir, the burned wayhouse, the auction. All of it arranged itself with terrible patience. Bren felt no betrayal, not exactly. She had owed him nothing. A name, perhaps, and she had given one. Truth was larger than names. It could crush a person if demanded before they had the hands to lift it. Near dusk they found shelter under an overhang where the rock leaned out from the hill, dry enough for a fire if smoke was kept small. Bren gathered wood. Vielle stood at the edge of the trees, looking back the way they had come. Her face had closed past watchfulness into something older, colder, not defense now, but memory of command without an army. He set the wood down. "Sit," he said, then regretted the command before it finished leaving his mouth. Vielle looked at him. For a moment he thought she might refuse because queens did not sit when told, and prisoners had been told too often. Then her mouth tightened, not quite pain, not quite humor. "I should have told you." Bren crouched to build the fire. "Yes." The honesty made her flinch more than reassurance would have. "Before the ferry." "Yes." He struck flint. Sparks died twice before catching. "Before the road," she said. "Maybe. Maybe?" The tinder took. He shielded it with his hand. "You were deciding whether I was safe. And now? Now men who know your title know my face." She turned away. That was not an answer. The flame grew, small and stubborn. "No," he said. "It wasn't." She came to the fire but did not sit. "My name is Vielle Kar-Uzan, daughter of Empress Shara of the Iron Crown and High Marshal Torveth of the Eastern Bloodline. I was named heir when I was 16 because my brothers were dead, and my cousins were either fools or beloved by fools. 18 months ago, my mother's second general opened the North Gate at Winter Court. My mother was killed in the hall under the iron lamps. My father died on the eastern stair. I was taken alive because dead heirs become banners and living ones become leverage. Loyalists tried to free me twice. Both attempts failed. After the second, the men who held me decided no Orc prison was safe. They sold me through human hands where my own people would be ashamed to search, and where anyone who saw me would think me already reduced to something beneath politics." She delivered it without drama, each sentence placed like a stone on a grave. Bren listened. Completely. The fire popped once. Wind moved snow powder over the rock above them. Vielle's hands hung at her sides, fingers slightly curled, nails biting into her palms. "The faction that holds the capital calls itself the Regency of Iron. They claim I murdered my mother with human aid. They claim I fled justice. They claim the Empire needs order more than blood. They are not entirely wrong about the last part, which is why many good people have obeyed them while waiting to see who survives long enough to become lawful." Her voice roughened, not with tears but with weariness so deep it had lost the shape of emotion. "If I go north, I become a cause. If I go south, I become a fugitive until they find me. If I stay with you, I become the reason men come in the night. I should have left you at the first road." Bren fed the fire one twig at a time. "Why didn't you?" She looked at him then, and the command in her face broke, not into softness, but into something more dangerous because it had no armor at all. "Because you burned the paper." The answer moved through him slowly. Not the purchase, not the food, not the knife, not standing before agents. The paper. Proof of ownership turned to ash under his heel, while she sat on a horse too tired to know whether freedom was a trick. The first stone, perhaps. Or one of the first. He was quiet for a long time after she finished, long enough that she began to rebuild herself against whatever judgment came next. He had many questions available: armies, loyalties, routes, how many agents, which passes, whether the Imperial Road could be used, whether any loyalists remained near the old capital. He felt each question present itself and pass by. They mattered. They would matter soon. But they were not the question before him, not the small human hinge on which the night turned. Vielle stood beside the fire with the weight of an empire set down between them and her body still too thin inside a borrowed dress. Bren looked at the bedrolls, at the mouth of the overhang, at the way she had chosen a position with stone at her back and a clear line to the trees. "Which side of the fire lets you sleep?" he asked. She stared. Of all the things he could have asked, the smallness of it seemed to disorient her more than suspicion would have. What? This side keeps the rock at your back. Other side keeps you farther from the path. I can take either. Her throat moved. Her eyes went to the fire, to the path, to the rock, to him. The question had not forgiven her. It had not sworn loyalty to a crown he did not understand. It had not turned her suffering into a noble thing, or demanded that she become a queen quickly enough to justify his risk. It had simply assumed there would be a night, and a fire, and a choice about sleeping. For a woman hunted across 3 territories, that was not small. Or perhaps it was small in the way a key was small. Rock, she said at last. Then take the rock. And you? Path. They may come from the path. That's why. She closed her eyes for one breath, then opened them. You don't know what this costs. No. You will. Probably. And still? Bren thought of a bridge at Merrow Ford, where he had gone back under fire because a boy he barely knew had cried out once, and then gone silent. He thought of a town made unsafe by the long shadow of armies, of a fever no command could halt, of a cup placed beside a hand that never lifted again. He thought of 6 months walking north, because grief had burned the map inside him and left only direction. He looked at Vielle, who was not saved, not safe, not his to rescue, standing in firelight with a crown's ruin behind her and snow in her hair. I already stood there, he said. She understood. Perhaps not the history, but the shape of the sentence. He saw it in the way her shoulders lowered by a fraction. She sat on the rock side of the fire. Not gracefully. Carefully, because her strength had limits, and pride had learned to negotiate with them. Bren set a blanket within reach, then turned to sharpen stakes for a warning line. After a while, she took the blanket. After another while, she lay down with her back to the stone and her face toward the fire. She did not sleep quickly. Neither did he. But near midnight, when the wind shifted and the fire sank low, Bren looked over and found her eyes closed, one hand loose outside the blanket, palm open rather than curled around the knife. He added wood without sound. Morning found them still under the overhang, not rested, not safe, but less alone inside the danger than they had been the night before. Snow had gathered at the mouth of the shelter in a soft white lip. Bren woke before Vielle and did not move at once, because her sleep had weight to it now, and he would not spend it carelessly. Her hand still lay open outside the blanket. The knife rested beside it, close enough for waking, far enough that her fingers had not needed to close around it in the dark. When she opened her eyes, she did not start. She looked at him, at the fire, at the path, and the whole terrible shape of what she had told him returned to her face by degrees. He watched her accept it back. That seemed to him a braver thing than any charge he had seen under banners. There is a loyalist hold 3 days north, she said. Her voice was rough from sleep. If it still stands. Bren rose and fed the last dry twigs into the embers. Then we go 3 days north. After that there may be commanders, oaths, demands. Then after that there is after that. She sat up slowly, the blanket falling to her waist, the borrowed dress wrinkled, her hair flattened on one side, the scar on her cheek pale in the morning light. Nothing about her looked like the songs humans made about hidden royalty. Everything about her looked like the truth of it. A woman stripped down to the bone of herself and still expected to become shelter for others. I will not be easy to stand beside, she said. Bren thought of the first night at the inn, of the key on the table, of her testing his purse, his sword, his sleep, his patience. He thought of her correcting his stitches, resetting snares, cutting the ferry rope with hands that had once signed orders in a palace. You haven't been, he said. For the first time that morning, something like amusement moved through her eyes. It did not stay long, but it stayed long enough. He packed the bedrolls while she banked the fire with snow until no smoke rose. At the edge of the trees, she paused and looked south, toward the border market, the platform, the room where a cup had been placed beside her sleeping hand. Then she looked north, toward a road that might return her to a crown or kill her before she reached it. Bren stood beside her without touching. After a moment she shifted her hand, not enough to take his, only enough that the backs of their knuckles met in the cold air. The contact was small, gloved in silence, but neither of them stepped away. The horse waited below the ridge with her head lowered against the wind. Bren took the reins. Vile took one step, then another, testing the snow before placing weight, the way a wall was built, the way trust was built, stone by stone and foot by foot. When the path narrowed, she did not move ahead of him or behind him. She walked at his side, and he matched her pace without comment, north opening before them in iron weather and pale light, unfinished, dangerous, and real.